Greetings, Westminster family. Well, this week has been quiet in the sanctuary, but we are still not finished. We have at least one more week of work to be accomplished there. What we thought was going to be a 2-week project has turned into a 2-month endeavor. After getting test results last week, on Friday, it was before Friday, Thursday, it was determined that there was still some mold left. So on Friday, the mold remediation company came back in, and so now we're waiting the results from the second test for mold. We're supposed to get that back tomorrow afternoon. So we are keeping our fingers crossed that we can move on to the last phase of the project, which is polishing the floors and putting the pews back in the sanctuary. Please read your announcements, the bulletin part of the announcements for news and events. There are opportunities for webinars described there and news about fellow church members. If you want to receive news flashes by text, just email Mary Lee with your name and cell phone number. Another reminder, the per capita fee of $34.22 is due by the end of this year. The sooner it comes in, the better it is for Westminster. To whet your appetite for the virtual Bible study beginning Thursday, September 10th at 1 o'clock, I'm giving you a brief introduction to the scripture text for this Sunday's worship service. If you haven't already signed up to participate, consider doing so. The more we have participating in the discussion, the more we learn. I'll begin with our scripture reading from the Old Testament for this Sunday. It comes from Exodus 3, verses 1 through 15. Last week we read about Moses' birth. This week we have skipped over the part where Moses, living the high life in the king's palace as the princess's adopted son, sees a harsh slave driver beating one of his people and kills him. Forced to flee from Egypt, he fled to Midian on the Sinai Peninsula, where he married a sheep farmer's daughter, Zipporah. Today we start our reading with Moses tending his father-in-law's sheep on Mount Horeb. Following the pattern for the calling of prophets, God speaks to Moses and gives him the commission to lead his people. In this case, God is a voice calling out to Moses in a burning bush, the fire in which does not consume the bush. Trees and their smaller counterparts, bushes, are rare in the Middle East and thus very special. The Bible begins and ends with an image of a tree. The tree of knowledge of good and evil in Genesis, which has the power of life and death, and the tree of life in the book of Revelation. In the Bible, trees are symbolic of the life force and God's providence and abundant gifts to humanity. In the Bible, the fire imagery is often related to God's nature, God's presence and actions. Fire can destroy, but fire can also purify. In the case of the burning bush, one might think of the bush as the Hebrew people and the fire as the hardships they are forced to bear. With God's steadfast love and care, they endure and are not destroyed. After God calls to Moses from the burning bush, God tells Moses to remove the sandals from his feet. This was a symbol of welcome. In the culture of that time, Inviting someone to take their sandals off was not just to keep the house clean. It represented intimacy. It said, kick off your shoes. You can be yourself here. This scene is reminiscent of Jesus washing his disciples' feet in John's Gospel. Next, God reveals God's relationship with the Hebrew people with action words. I have seen, I have heard, I know their sufferings. Addressing the present moment, God says, I have come down. Another verb indicating God's love in action. Then the promise of future action. I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land. Next, we have one of the most significant passages in the Bible. The Almighty answers Moses' query regarding how to address this divine voice with a name. The best translation is, I will be whoever I will be. The name given allows for intimacy with Moses without giving up power or sovereignty by being defined by a name. Neither Israel or the church will contain or control God. Our reading from the Psalms echoes the theology found in our reading from Exodus. God acts in concrete ways to help God's people, and we are to remember them. God's name is holy. We are to seek God's presence wherever we are. The excerpts from Psalm 105, which comprise our assigned lectionary reading, skip the retelling of Israel's history from the covenant with Abraham to Moses leading the people out of slavery in Egypt to the promised land. The psalm encourages praise and obedience as the proper response in the present and future for what they acknowledge God has done for them in the past. Theologically, it's important to note that the psalmist claims God's grace precedes the people's response of obedience to God's laws. The people are urged to remember and spread the story of God's wonderful works on their behalf. The people have no right to claim power or privilege because every gift is from God. Psalm 105 forms a pair with Psalm 106. While Psalm 105 extols God's gracious deeds in the past, Psalm 106 recounts the people's long history of disobedience and ingratitude. God's amazing grace is the source of well-being in the past, present, and the only hope for the future. Our epistle reading from Paul's letter to the Roman congregation, chapter 12, verses 9 through 21. Now, you will have heard phrases from this passage used as the commission at the close of a worship service. Love one another, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good, and so on. As Romans is the culmination of Paul's theology, this is a significant statement concerning Christ's teachings and how they are to be lived out in his disciples, who make up the church. Christian discipleship requires humility, love for one's neighbors, honoring all people, welcoming all people, empathizing with others' cares and concerns, and pursuing peace. Jesus' command to love our enemies means forgiving others, forsaking vengeance. In popular language, When they go low, we go high. This is overcoming evil with good. Love is not merely an abstract sentiment. Christian disciples are to demonstrate love for both enemies and friends in tangible ways according to their needs. Our gospel reading is from Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 through 28. Last week we read Peter's bold affirmation of Jesus' identity. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Then Jesus proclaimed, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. If you were Roman Catholic, you would say Peter was named the first pope. Sadly, it seems that Peter was not infallible. His first day on the job, and Jesus even calls him, first tells him that his message was all wrong, and then even calls him Satan. Peter, the rock, becomes the stumbling block to God's plan for humanity's salvation. This is the first time Jesus has spoken directly to the disciples to tell them he will suffer and die, leaving them to carry on his mission on earth. As Moses had to sacrifice his own desires for comfort and safety, Jesus' disciples must follow his own example of sacrifice. Our journey to the cross is the journey to lose the stumbling blocks of our own egos, to die to self in such a way that we can live for God and one another. I hope this will help prepare you for participation in the Sunday morning worship service. Have a good rest of the week. May God bless you.